hours. So as you know that your syllabus consists of 5 modules. So I will spend 5 hours on each of these modules, with one exception, that is the module on this pattern CPM will get 2 hours. Right. So if you see that there are 5 modules. So module first one is about the introduction, second one is about the project planning and project identification, then third module is on project implementation, the fourth module is on project evaluation and control, and the fifth module is on project team management. So I will be spending 1 hour on each of these modules, with the exception that project evaluation and control I will have 2 hours, for the reason that it has problems, right? It is a problem oriented module. All other modules, most often it is a theory oriented, right? So now we will start with module 1. Module 1, broadly, these are the components of module 1. So meaning, definition, scope and coverage, role of a project manager, evaluation of integrated project management system, project portfolio management system, project life cycle, feasibilities of projects, different forms of project contracting, role of consultants in project management. So this is the component as given in your syllabus. So we start with the definition of a project. So according to the Project Management Institute, it defines a project like this. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service or result. So what does it mean is that it is a temporary one, that is it is not going to be permanent, that is I will come to that characteristics. But temporary means it's not, it is going endlessly. That is the meaning, right? It's a temporary endeavor which may result, right? Which may result in a product, right? Or a service or a result. Example, a product, right? So let us say Apple Corporation has started a project to come with a new iPhone product. So obviously it may run for maybe two years, right? To bring that new product. Or for example, let us say Karnataka government has come with a proposal to start a maybe a new thermal power station. So it may be a project. So it may take 5 years, right, to start and end this project, right? So power plant, right? So typically these are all product oriented projects. Why? Because it results in some products, right? It results in some tangible thing, right? So obviously at the end of this Apple project, you get a new product. Obviously at the end of the 5 years by government of Karnataka undertaking, right? So you will get a new thermal power station, right? So that's the meaning, right? Okay, so let us take another example, service, right? So let us say online banking, a new small business, small bank, right? So it's starting with the core banking solution, right? And they are implementing as part of that the online banking, right? So even though it may have some product also, but more often it is oriented towards service, right? So getting the customers, right, to do online transactions, either it may be in terms of, right, so crediting into their bank account, or debiting, or transferring some money, right, or receiving some money, anything related to this, right? So a project may consist of coming with the online banking solutions, right? So it may have different components, right? Okay, for example, in Google search, it's coming with a new kind of search engine, right? So, or a modified kind of search engine, right? It may run for 2 years or 3 years. At the end of the project, they may get a a revamped kind of search engine, right? Which may incorporate all these new kinds of techniques like machine learning or artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so result oriented, right? For example, right? So it is so let us say Kannada government or Kannada government in combination with the government of India, they are going for the expansion of Kempegowda International Airport, for example, right? So obviously it comes with a result, right? At the end of the project, right, you get expanded expanded kind of airport or new runway, right, or new facility for the customers, right? So it includes all these things, right? Typically a project may end with, right, a product or service, right? Okay, so I hope you understood. We will go to the next. That is characteristic of a project. Right? What are the characters? What are the features of a project? Typically, it is well established, right? Any project should have an established objective, right? So at the end of the project, this is what I am going to get. This is what the product I am going to do, right? This is what I am envisaging. This kind of product or these services will be included in the project, right? Okay, so it will have an established objective, right? I am, let us say you are building a new house, right? So at the end of the period, right, you have the objective fulfilled, right? So a livable house has been constructed, right, so that you can move into the new house, right? So it always any project has an established objective, right? Always a project has a defined lifespan, right, with the beginning and an end, right? Okay, so as we talked about, right, let us say Apple is coming with a new iPhone product, right? So there is a sort of the product, right, the project, right? So maybe like let us say 1st August 2022 it starts, right? When it may end, right? Let us say the project duration is 2 years or 3 years. So maybe in the year 2025 they are coming with a new product. So obviously you are talking about, right, a definite end, a definite beginning, right? A definite beginning, a definite end, right? So any project, it cannot go endlessly, right? It should come to an end, right? Okay, so that's a conclusion of the project. Let us say you are talking about the R&D project, coming with a new delivery, new drug, or coming with a new vaccine, right? So for example, COVID, right? So obviously it may also be a project, right? It's an R&D project, right? Okay, so or let us say you're coming with a new space station, right? So obviously it may also be a project, right? So these projects, right, it may go for some longer duration, maybe 5 years or maybe 6 years, likewise, right? Okay, so any project has a lifespan, right, with a definite beginning and an end, right? And any project, right, has the need the coordination of different people, need the coordination of different departments, right? Okay, for example, let us say you are talking about, yeah, building a new space station, or let us say building a new missile, right? Okay, or building a new satellite, right? New satellite, right? Okay, so satellite, it requires, right, for example, right, you may need the team which are involved in, right, developing the equipment for the project, right, integration of that particular satellite, right, so checking the interfaces, right? So there may be different departments working simultaneously on this satellite project, right, so that they can coordinate and come with a new satellite which can be lost, which can be launched, and it can be there in the space for maybe 5 years or 7 years, right? Okay, so any project involves many of the people with a different expertise, right? Different functions, right? Different interlinkages, right? Okay, so that is the third characteristic of a project, right? And typically any project, right, it's like a new one, right? Okay, it has never been done before, right? So Maybe, right, some project may be a renovated, a renewed one, or maybe an extension, right? Okay. But most of the projects, if you see that, they go for a new one, right? For example, building a new dam, right? Building a satellite, as we talked about, right? Coming with a new drug for a particular disease, right? So on, so on and so forth. So when you're talking about that, right, project, when you say that project refers to a new kind of initiative, right? Okay, right. So we talked about project and how has any project has specific time and also a lot of investment is required, right? So a satellite you are talking about, right? It may be involving about 500 or 1,000 crores, right? A drug delivery, right? So maybe, right, it involves maybe another, maybe some 1,000 crores, right? Or a new car, right? It may involve some 2,000 crores, right? Okay, so these are all projects, right, which involves a huge investment, right? Okay, and also it's right, it has the performance characteristics, right? So a car, right, when I say that a new car project, so you mean that the car should function in this defined manner. A car should have a life of so many years. A car should have, right, so much fuel efficiency. A car should have so much performance, right, in terms of, right, so pickup, or in terms of deceleration, or in terms of engine output, right, and so on and so forth, right? So these are all some of the specific characteristics of a project, right? When you look at any project, so it should have a definite lifespan, it should have a definite objective, right? So it involves professionals, it involves, right, so a lot of cost and performance characteristics. So we'll go to the next, right? The scope of your project, right? So any project, right? You have to define with a defined boundary, right? Okay, right? So deliverables, deadlines, right? That is the meaning of the scope, right? Meaning of the scope, right? So here I have given an example, right? For example, right? So when we consider our institute, right? Let us say they are building a new fence between, right, the between the institute and the outside dwellings, right, or the houses, right? So what is the scope it talks about, right? Is this, so you are talking about a fence which consists of the steel post with contract filled poles, right? The fences should be built out of metal wires or mesh, right? It will be of, right, so 8 feet height, right? So that is the way I am defining the scope of the project, right? What does it mean? What is the boundary, right? And how it is built, and what are the material you use, right? So typically this is the scope of your project, right? The scope of your project. So it comes under the project planning, right? So as I talked about, it has the goals, deliverables, right? Task, cost, and deadlines. Right? So typically when you talk about the scope, right? So at the end of this scope definition, you come with a document that is called scope document, right? So because whenever you are defining or whenever you are starting project, you should have the specific limits, specific limitations, specific boundaries, right? So that's called the scope, right? And the statement that the document you are going to generate is called the scope statement or term of reference. Okay, so that is the way you can define the project scope, right? So next we will talk about the project manager and the role of a project manager, right? Okay, so an important catalyst in any project is project manager, right? Okay, so he plays a very pivotal role. So that is why I call it as a catalyst, right? So more often, right? So any project depends upon this project manager. The project management manager may be in a middle level or maybe at a senior level, management level, right? So, okay, for example, let us say you are talking about a project that involves a software, right? Typically, right, the project manager would have put some maybe 7 to 10 years of experience, right? So he will become a project manager. Or let us say that you are talking about, yeah, so building a satellite, right, is a project, right? Obviously he may be a senior scientist, right? So he would have spent maybe 20 years in the satellite or in the space station related activities, right? Okay, so that is how, right, you can talk about the project manager. Project manager may have varying expertise. Project manager may have longevity of their experience may be different, right? Depends upon the project, how complex the project is. For example, constructing a house, right? Constructing a building, right? So obviously, the kind of expertise you require, maybe a project manager or maybe a construction project manager may would have spent some 5 to 7 years in the same field, right? But at the same time, building a satellite, right, it involves a lot of complexities, right? So you expect the project manager of high expertise, and they would have spent, right? So as I told you, right, 20 to 25 years of experience, right? Okay, so that is the way that you can talk about the project manager. So coming to the role of a project manager, right? So he plays a very dominant role, as I talked about, right? He is a catalyst, he is a pivotal person, right? Who involved in, right? Whose roles may be ranging in the entire life cycle of the project, maybe planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing out the project, right? So he will be involved in from the initiation stage to the closure stage, right? So that is the way the project manager goes all along the project, right? Throughout the project. Okay. So typically they are accountable for the entire project scope, the project team and resources, the budget, right? Project budget and success of the success or the failure of the project. So very important, right? Some of the projects, right, if you look at the data, right, 30% of the project, right, so it fails, right? Okay, so typically, right, so failure rate also is exorbitant, right? So how do you go about, how do you execute the project, how do you plan the project, right? It's very, very important, right? Okay, right? So, and many of the projects may have, right, so time overrun, cost overrun, resource overrun, right? If we see that, for example, in India, right, many of the projects are of this kind, right? So any project, right, the time may be something, right, it may take double the time, right? So resource may be something, it may exceed the resources, right? Especially financial resources, right? For so many reasons, right? So obviously the project manager, right, should spend, so he is a pivotal person, right? He plays many dominant role, right? And the success of the failure is dependent on the project manager, right? Okay, so we'll go to the next. Okay, so responsibilities. So responsibilities of a project manager. So he defines the project process and the roles of different stakeholders, including people, right? Including the lot of equipment you are going to employ, lot of resources that are going to be employed, right? So he is the overall in charge, right? So he is involved in implementation of all the processes, right? Communication, right? Communicates with the various stakeholders, right? Because ultimately in any project it involves, right, execution by the personnel, right, by people, right? So obviously a project manager is expected to play a dominant role in communication, interpersonal relationship, right, people management, right? Okay, so motivating the people, right? Okay, so that is important, right? Because ultimately, any project implementation boils down to how you manage the people. If the people are coordinating, right, obviously the project will have the smooth sailing, right? So it can be, right, completed in the predetermined time, right? It may be completed in the predetermined budget, right? And so on and so forth, right? Okay, so communication is an important thing that is expected from a project manager. Again, right, clarity in their, right, how do you spell, how do you, right, communicate, right, clarity, right. Okay, so facilitate organizational support. So what does it mean that, right? So if there is any problem, right? So how he gets involved the organization, right? Because project management is the interface between the people who are implementing and the people where it is implemented, right? So organization vis-a-vis the people, right? So obviously he's an interface, he is the middle person, right? He is an intermediary, right? So obviously, right, sometimes, right, something may go wrong or something may be expected more than what is allocated or budgeted, right. So it requires the support of the organization. So obviously, right, a project manager should convince the organization, convince the top level management to support these people, right. Okay, all right. So the next one is establish trust. So another very important thing, right? So when you deal with the people, so important thing is how the people trust you, right? How the people trust you, right? If you build the trust, right? If they believe you, right? Obviously, right, the project may have a smooth sailing, right? Okay, right. So the another quality of another responsibility of a project manager is manage outcomes by delivering, by developing performance measures, right, very important, right. So when you are talking about budget allocation, when you are coming with a new project, how it is, how the performance of that particular project, right, in terms of, right, the lifespan of the project, in terms of some of the measurement. For example, we talked about a new car, right? How good the car is, right? Obviously, easily measured, right? What is the engine throughput? What is the engine mileage, right? So what is the engine capacity, right? So on, so on, and so forth, right? So these performance measures can be measured, right? So the project manager should be able to develop, right, different performance measures, but also, right, and also, right, he will be in position to measure this performance, right. Okay, last but not the least is about the entire success of the project. I have been talking about, right, so projects may also fail, right. So ultimately it depends on the project manager, how, right, how good the project, how successful the project is, right. Okay, so these are all some of the roles and responsibility of a project manager. Okay, so skill set, right? I just go through because we have elaborated on the roles and responsibilities while we were discussing about what is expected from the project manager. Also, we have discussed, right? So leadership qualities, people management qualities, effective communication qualities. Many of these qualities, if you see that these are all the soft skills expected from a project manager, right? So then the technical skills, right? Obviously, right, a project manager should also possess the technical skills and the expertise, but more often it is the, right, the soft skills, the soft part of management, it comes into picture, right. So effective communication, influencing the people, negotiation, conflict management, an important area, right, where the project managers, right, so many people depend on the project managers, right, because any project there may be conflicts, there may be some misgivings, there may be miscommunications, right. Okay, how was a project manager able to resolve, right. Okay, conflict management is a very important skill, it is expected from a project manager, right. Planning, contract management, estimating, problem solving, right, creative thinking, type management, right. So most of the things, as I told you, right, this relates to the soft skills, right. So soft kind of management, right, that a project manager is expected to possess. Okay, so the next one is about the integrated project management, right. as the name indicates, right? How do you integrate, right? So as we talked about, there are many stakeholders, right? So let's say you are talking about a big project, right? A construction of a dam, right? So obviously there are many stakeholders out there. On one side, government is there. On another side, farmers community is there. On the third side, right, there may be right common people involved, environmentalists, right? So, okay, right. So environmentalist, and then right. So there may be right other abstract kind of thing, right? So the flora and fauna, right, in and around, right? So there may be many stakeholders you are talking about, right? So the integrated project management talks about how do you coordinate all these resources, how do you coordinate all these stakeholders, right? Okay, so that they can work in a consistent manner to deliver the deliverables that are expected from the project, right? Right, taking into the confidence, right, every one of the stakeholders, right? For example, right, so air dam, right, so there may be problem with the flora fauna, right, in and around the places, right? So obviously environmentalists may have the problem, right? Seismology, right? So when the dam is constructed, so obviously there may be problem with the seismology, right? So earthquakes happening, right, tremors happening, right? So there may be problem, right? So again, right, the people living in and around the dam, right, they may get affected, right? It's because when you talk about dam, right, so you are storing the water, sometimes the water may exceed the capacity, right? When you release the water, what happens to the people in and around, right, living in that area, right? Okay, so there may be a lot of repercussions, there may be a lot of consequences, right? Obviously you take into account all these things, right? So okay, so that's called the integrated project management, right? Coordinating various resources, stakeholders, right, to ensure that the each department, each of these people, right, each of these functions working in a consistent manner, right, so that the goals of the project is achieved, the objective of the project is achieved, right? So that is what the integrated project management is, right? Okay, so and also when you talk about the project management, right, so there may be a definite, right, so you may talk in terms of the project management system also, right? When you talk about system, so obviously there is input, there is output, and there is process, right? Any system, right, any project may be considered as a system also, because there are a lot of inputs related, right, so required for the project, and also it has a conversion process which results in the output in terms of product or services. Okay, so more or less we talked about, right, so coordinating tasks, resources, stakeholders, right, in addition, right, conflict management, etc. So that is about integrated management, project management, right? We talk about the evolution of project, right? Project is not a new kind of thing, right? So since the Sindh Valley civilization onwards, the project was there, right? So typically, right, earlier the project refers to public project, right? Okay, the project for the society, right? For example, right, if you would have read somewhere, right, about the Sindh Valley civilization and all, right, there were mm, big halls, there were well laid streets, right? Okay, there were public bath systems, right? Typically they are the projects, right? Projects for the society, right? Okay, so project per se is not a new phenomena, right? But project, how do you handle the project? How do you manage the project? It has evolved over a period of time. Typically, this evolution of project, right? So the history of evolution of project can be put under 4 or 5 stages, right? 4 or 5 stages, right? How the project management technique has advanced over these years, right? The first stage we can talk about before 1958, 1958, right? Okay, so maybe during the early time of, right, industrial revolution, right? So that is the period, right? So, okay, so if we look at the scientific management, right? So Gantt chart came into picture, right? So Gantt chart is a wonderful right chart which gives you the timeline of the project, right? So still any software, project management software, right? You can come across Gantt chart, right? Okay, a timeline chart, right? Which is used to schedule different events or activities, right? Okay, so that came into existence during this period only, right? And then an important scheduling technique called critical path method, right? Okay, critical path method, right? That also came into existence during this period, right? Okay, so still this is the workhorse of many of these scheduling techniques, critical path method, that we are going to learn in the fourth module, right? Okay, and then how do you picturize this? How do you draw the sketch, right? Precedence diagram method, right? So it came into existence during this period, right? And another kind of scheduling technique called project evaluation review technique, right, also came into this time, right? Project evaluation and review technique, right? Okay, so these are some of the advancement happened, right, just before, right, some before 1985. So which we term it as the early, right, early evolution of project management, right? Okay, so the next one is stage two, right? So typically, right, so along with the technical kind of or scientific kind of orientation, people kind of orientation also came into picture during this stage, right? During this phase, right? So this phase belongs to the years maybe from 1958 to 1979, right? Okay, so 1979, right? So typically, right, the conflict management, right? So uh, how do you manage the people? How do you manage the project, right? Because project involves not only the equipment but also the people, right? So conflict management, right? Okay, it becomes an important part of project management. Then work breakdown structure, right? How do you go in an iterative manner to achieve the project objectives, right? Or so which is called as work breakdown structure, right? We will talk about later, right? And then iterative project planning, right? And so planning in a systematic manner, right? How do you go about, right? So these advancements happen during this period. So that we term it as a stage two or phase two kind of evolution, right? Let's say third stage is we can earmark the years between 1980 to 1994. Okay, so this project management led to different kinds of implementation. For example, right, so from industrial revolution to, right, industrial based economy to service based economy to knowledge based economy or information based economy, what was happening during this period, right? So project management have found a lot of applications in software projects, right? Okay, software projects. So the computer scientists, right? So they were trying to develop different kinds of project management techniques, right? So that is applicable to the software implementation, right? So some kind of agile technologies, right? Software project management, right? Managing software projects, right? So there are many models they talk about: waterfall model, spiral model, win-win spiral model, iterative model, right? Rapid application models, right? So these models came into picture during this period, right? So early development is not, right, so completely came up, but there were a lot of initiatives during this period, right? Okay, so which is called as lightweight methodologies, and then right, widespread of usage of software, right? So for example, right, so if you recall, right, in India, right, Wipro had, right, different kinds of software projects to start with, right? Okay, and then TCS came with a different kind of software, and then Microsoft came with a wonderful software MS project, right? And then Primavera came, right? So there are a lot of influence of softwares in the field of project management, right? So these softwares why it is useful, how far it benefits is that easily you can schedule the events, right? So let us say your project may consist of maybe hundreds of activities, right? So very difficult to schedule it on a piece of paper, right? So some people used to spend weeks together to draw this scheduling, right? To draw this particular, right, diagram, right, precedence diagram, right? But by using the software, you can easily draw within hours or within, right, minutes, right? If it is a small project, right, that is possible because of the software, right? Or let us say you are talking about resource allocation, resource leveling, right? So these things can be done, right, easily with the software. So employment of software gain a lot of momentum during this period. And then risk management, right? Okay, managing risk. Any project, right, subject to continue conditionalities, not of a lot of uncertainty is there. How do you manage this, right, risk? Right? Okay, so risk management came into picture, right? A lot of financial management related, right, concepts, right? Okay, so has gained a lot of momentum during this period. So that is, these are all some of the features of the stage 3, right? So that is the project management advancements during the period 1980 to 1994. Okay, so the next kind of development is happening, right? So 1995 to now, or you can branch now in a different manner, right? So one is, as I talked about, agile methodologies, right? So because you are talking about information based economy or knowledge based economy, right? So more and more investment information based projects are coming in, right? So that is why you find a lot of agile methodologies applications in project management, right? Okay, right. So then, right, so there is another concept came into picture, critical chain project management, right? Okay, so which helps the people to be assigned, people to be managed, right, depending upon their availability, depending upon their expertise, right? That is called critical chain project management, right? And many of the institutes also started offering, right, project management courses because it needs different kinds of expertise, right? So maybe in the graduate level or maybe in the postgraduate level, there were many programs started coming up, right, during this period, right? So that is the last phase or the phase that you are witnessing now, right? What is witnessing now, right? Lot of data, right? So data validation, right, the data analysis, right? Okay, so these are all happening now with the advent of much more, right, advanced computing technologies, right? So modern technology paradigms like machine learning or artificial intelligence or neural networking, right? How do you employ this in the project management, right? So that is what happening recently. So this is the way you can talk about the evolution of, right, so project management over the years, right? We will go to the next, project portfolio management and project portfolio management systems, right? Okay, so as an organization, right, so there may be different project may be going on, right? So or one project may be going on, another project may be starting, right? Or one project may be coming to an end, another project may be starting, right? So there may be various kinds of projects going on, right? So especially in a software company, right? So many project teams may be working on, right? Okay, on different projects, right? For example, one team may be working on bank visualization, another team may be working on insurance, right? Okay, so another vertical may be working on, right, so business processes, right? So oriented kind of projects, right? So there may be many teams working on, right? And these teams, their expertise level, their manpower requirement, right, so may be different, right? So how do you manage in this kind of situation, right? That is what, right? So it's project portfolio management, right? Same way, right? So a construction company may be taking up different kinds of construction projects, right? Yeah, for example, right, ISRO, right? So Indian Space Research Organization may be doing different projects at the same time, right? For example, one project may be working on voyage to moon, right? Another project putting a capsule or putting a space station in, right? So in the atmosphere, right? So in the space, right? Another may be working on, right, putting the people, right, or going to Mars, right? So there may be many projects working on, right? Okay, people may be working on. How do you manage, right? So because people are scarce, resources are scarce, right? Okay, domain expertise are scarce, right? So obviously you have to manage with the limited resources, with the limited manpower, and also the time, right? So this kind of technique, right, managing different projects is called the project portfolio management, right? So as the definition talks about, right, is the selection, prioritization, and control of organization programs and projects, right, in line with the specific objectives and capacity to deliver, right? Okay, right. So we have to stretch it, but at the same time, you have to ensure that yes, whether it is within the organization limit, right? Okay, because too much stretching also, right, results in a lot of problems to the people, a lot of problems to the management, and in turn, a lot of problems to the organization also, right? Okay, so next sentence it talks about, right, the goal is to balance the implementation of change initiatives, right? Okay, so you would balance the requirement, right? Okay, so that so each project can be done in a better, right, systematic manner, in a smooth manner, right? Okay, without lot of, right, conflicts, without lot of misgivings, etc., right? So that is what the project portfolio management is, right? Okay, so we'll move on to the next, project life cycle, right? Another important component of any project management is project life cycle, right? How the project goes through different phases, right? Okay, right. So sometimes some books call it as phases of project management, right? But most of the books talks about, right? So project life cycle, right? Okay, typically, right, you can talk about project life cycle, right, in terms of four phases, right? Four phases, right? For the first one is a definition stage, the second one is planning stage, and the third one is the execution stage, and the fourth one is flow stage. Right? I just show you a picture, a figure to show what does it mean by this product life cycle. Right? So if you see that here, right, this particular figure, particular sketch, it talks about four phases of or four stages of project life cycle. Right? First one is definition of project, right? The second one is planning of project, and the third one is execution, and the fourth one is closing, right? So if you see that the curves indicates that definition, right? There is nothing like that, right? So one stage completing another stage, right? So beginning, right? There may be overlap, right? There may be overlap. That is why the curves, if you see that there is a peak and there is a fall also, right? Okay, there is a decline also, right? Okay, so if we see that the definition stage, right, is starts momentum, and then the definition stage, right, coming to an end in a slowed down manner, right? It is not abruptly it stops, right? Okay, same way if you see the planning stage, right? Okay, you are talking about, right, it is gaining momentum and then it's ultimately stops, right? Same way execution stage, right? Okay, so it's starting, gaining momentum, and then, right, falling, and same way, right, closing stage, right? So if we see that first three stages, it may start from the beginning, right? But obviously, closing stage, right, it comes at the end, right? It cannot begin when there is a planning or when there is a execution stage. Right? Broadly, some of the activities under or different components under each of these stages are explained, right? So definition stage, you talk about goals of the project, right? Okay, you talk about specifications, what is expected, right? So of a project specifications, right? And then task, right, related to different stakeholders. Okay, task, right, defining the task of the projects, right? And then roles and responsibilities of different people involved in a project, right? So that is the definition stage, right? That is the definition stage, right? And if you see that on the x-axis, right, it talks about time. On the y-axis, it talks about level of effort, right? Okay, so if you see that right definition stage, the level of effort may be less. When you talk about planning, the level of effort may be more. And when you are at the execution stage, the level of effort may be at the peak, right? So you come across various kind of eventualities, right? So the effort required during this execution is enormous, right? And then closing stage, okay, it may be not much, right? Okay, so coming to the second phase or stage, okay, or the life cycle, right? Okay, so it's planning, right? You are defining the schedules, you are trying to determine the budget requirement, right? You are trying to determine the resources required for carrying out the project, and then you're talking about risk associated with the taking of the project, right? Okay, and the loss, right? But not the least, right? So it is about the stock, right? Okay, what is the human resources requirement, right? Okay, so that is the way you talk about the planning stage, right? Okay, so the next stage is about execution, right? Okay, so you try to employ, right? You try to see that how the project is, right? Okay, progressing, right? So obviously you have to do some kind of, right, plan versus execution variances, right? Variance report, right? Okay, right. So maybe you have to allocate more resources so that the project may be in line with the defined time, right? Okay, right. So classing can take place and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so that is the part of execution. And then closing, right? Closing happens, right, in three ways, right? Okay, right. So trying to see, right, in the closer stage, trying to see that how you have executed the project, trying to see that, right, so the equipment related to this project may be re-employed, right? The software required may be re-employed to the next phase, next project, right? So these are all some of the part of the process, right? Or closing, right? Okay, so that is the way you talk about four phases or the stages of the project life cycle, right? So the explanation is given, in the different stages. Okay, so the definition stage is specification of the project or define project objectives or established teams are formed and major responsibilities are assigned, right? So that is the scope of this definition stage. Coming to planning stage, right? So typically, as I told you, right, the level of effort increases, right? Plans are developed, right, to determine what a project may entail, right? The scheduling the project, who will benefit, what is the quality level expected, what is the risk associated with the project, right? What is the budget required, right? So all these things becomes the part of planning stage. So again, as we talked about the execution stage, right? So a lot of efforts, it involves a lot of efforts. It may involve a lot of physical as well as the mental efforts. Okay, so typically, right, so during this course or at the end of this course, the product may be produced or a service kind of project may come to an end or a software would have been developed, right? A package would have been developed, right? Okay, a solution may be developed, right? So that is the kind of end result of the execution, right? Okay. and time, cost, and specification measures are used to, right, to see that it is executed as per the requirement. If there is any deviation, how do you correct it, right, in terms of time or in terms of resources. Okay, so what kind of revisions or changes are necessary? So that is the way you talk about, right? So I talked about the closer. Closer involves three activities, namely the delivering the product or service to the customer. That is the outcome of the project. Redeploying the project resources, right? As I talked about, it may be in terms of the equipment or the resources, human resources, right? And then post-project reviewing the project, where we went wrong, where there was a there was an exception, where there was a maybe, right. So the time, in terms of time, how much it is exceeded, right, and how do you correct it if you come across same kind of project next time? How do you execute it? How do you ensure that the time is, right, determined in a proper judicial manner, right? Okay, so all these kind of analysis is done as part of the post project. So the next one is about the project feasibility. Right? Any project involves the feasibility study. The feasibility study may be many kind, right? So some of the feasibility study may be in terms of economic feasibility, right? Technical feasibility, operational feasibility, right? Organizational feasibility. There may be many kinds of feasibilities, of course, depending upon the kind of project you may have, right? So some of the feasibility studies may be, right, common to all, right, and some of the feasibility studies may be required for some of the specific projects, right? Okay, so that these studies should be done for the reason that this feasibility study shows, or right, the feasibility study results in whether you can take up the project, right, okay, in a, okay, and we can implement it, or we have to revisit the project, right? So that is the need for feasibility study, right? If you do, if you go with a project without feasibility study, there is a chance that you may fail, right? To prevent the chance of failure, right? As I told you, right, 30% of the projects, right, fail, right? To ensure that the project may be completed without any problem, the feasibility studies are very important, essential part of any project management. Okay, so that is what the project feasibility is, right? Is the study of project various elements to determine if it has the potential for success. Right? It ensures, right? That is why at any cost, right? So all the projects, they do the feasibility study. For example, let's say you are talking about laying a rail, right? Laying a rail road, right, between one place to another place, right? They do the feasibility study, right? For example, coming with a nuclear power plant, they do the feasibility study, right? How it affects the flora and fauna. What is the risk of, right? So earthquake or tremors, right? Okay, in the particular area, right? Okay, right, and right, what is the requirement of labor, right? Okay, is the society is receptive to establishing or implementing such projects, right? Whether it will affect the environment, right? So all these studies should be done, right? Okay. So that is part of the project feasibility. That is part of the project feasibility, right? So here is an example I had given. A hospital, for example, aiming to expand, right? Add an extension to the building, right? So typically, right, they may, right, do a feasibility study, right? What may be the cost involved, right? What may be the kind of, right, building they require, how big the building is, right? What may be the budget required, on what are the resources required, whether what is the time required, right? So all those things they look at. Next is, right, project contract. So obviously, right, as part of the project, right, everything may not be done by the internal sources, right? May not this, right? Any project may involve some people from outside, right? Okay, or some of these projects, right? Some component of project may be given to somebody else, external agencies, right? So typically, right, so you are talking about the employment of contractors, right, or project contract, right? Okay, project contract. So when you talk about kind of contract, right, you talk about two major different kinds of contracts, right? One is fixed price contract, another one is cost plus contract. Okay, so obviously, right, people who are involved in their own building of their houses or homes, right, they would have come across these kind of, right, two different kinds of contracts, right? Fixed price, right? So typically, right, this project involves so much money, right? You give to the contractor so much money, right? So that the contractor completes the project and then take away the money, right? So that's the way you define the fixed price contracts, right? Okay, right? So lump sum money is given so that the contractor executes the project and take the monies, right? Take the money for you, right? Okay, right? So, but what is the right? So, what is the problem the contractor may face? So, he should be very, very cautious in estimating the cost, right? Because, right, you know that, right, in some kind of eventualities, the project may overrun the budgeted price, right? So, obviously, he should be cautious in determining the project cost. Otherwise, right, it may result in loss to it, right? Okay, it may result in loss to you, right? Okay, so that is a problem with the fixed cost contracts. The next one is about the cost plus contract, right? Typically, right, so what is the cost involved in the project, right? Plus what are the margin it is decided for the contractor, that is given, right? Okay, so right, so it involves, right, what are the materials required is maybe supplied by the person who are executing the project, or maybe supplied by the agencies that are executing the project, or maybe by any organization executing the project, right? The materials may be supplied to the contractor, but contractor executes the product, and what are the margin is decided upon. For example, 10%, right, or 20%, right, above the cost, right?